So thank you to all of you who have joined us this morning. As mentioned, this is our third webinar of our webinar series for 2019. Just a couple things to make sure. Right now, voice is coming through. If at any point you can't hear Wendy or myself, please just drop in a little comment or a question and we'll get that sorted right away. Or you can even raise your hand and I might send you a message on the side. If there are any questions, you have the question button you can ask. Those will all pop up for me. And at the end of Wendy's webinar and her discussion, there'll be an allocated time frame for that. So I will pass on the questions to Wendy and she'll answer them. You can start writing them from the very beginning until after as more questions come in. We will try to get through as many as possible. Of course, we want to be mindful of utilizing our time and getting as much information out as possible as we can. So that's just a little bit on the admin side of how to get this webinar going. And if we're all good on that, let's get started. So first of all, welcome Wendy, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So those of you who are unfamiliar with Wendy, I have a little bit of a background to explain about her and her role within developing athletes, and then I will briefly kind of tie in that into what today's webinar will be, and I'll pass it on to Wendy, and you can go and describe a little bit more about the webinar and then get started. Sounds good?
Sounds great.
Perfect. So, Wendy, before I start, could you just help me pronounce your full name, just so I don't make a mistake on that one?
It's Wendy Rijnen Glover.
Perfect. So, as mentioned, Wendy Rijnen Glover has spent 21 years developing potential in athletes and with teams. She's able to support athletes in the best way for their success individually and on teams. She approaches development in athletes by understanding many factors related to the sport, besides just the technical and tactical aspects, which are mostly what is focused on by coaches, teams, and other organizations. Of concern is developing the potential and providing much needed support of the player in other areas unrelated to technical or tactical development. Wendy's interest is not only in developing the athlete's sport performance, but developing the physical, intellectual, emotional, and social needs of the athlete, or PIES for short. Based on a proven personal development system, this is how she'll develop this component. This support system allows the player to focus more on their sport, and Wendy has developed this concern after over 20 years of teaching, coaching, and assisting athletes transition through sport. All this kind of started with players sharing their concerns with Wendy, and as this concern arose, each year Wendy has added more to her portfolio of ways to improve how she can help them reach their potential in a more holistic manner. As mentioned previously, schools usually see players as a student and teams see them as an athlete. However, there's so much more to be explored in their potential in a more holistic manner that will produce improvements in all areas of their life, including sport performance. So, Wendy, I'll pass this on to you now, and you can dive in a little bit more on your background that I might have missed, and then you can kind of brief us for what today's webinar will be, and we'll go from there.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, first I wanted to mention thank you for having me, and I'm very pleased to be assisting Ontario Soccer with this very personal and important concept that I think is gaining steam in the area. In regards to my background, I still play soccer and have been playing over 4 years. And so I have a little personal interest in the pathway development of soccer players as I had to manage that and navigate that myself. And I have been working 15 years in this role, pathway planning high school students into exiting high school, players that have moved on to Division I, and as well as players who can consistently stay house league or move up and down a few levels and move into the active for life phase. So every athlete and every soccer player that has come up before me deserves their support, deserves a lot of support on their journey, which is very specific to them. So in saying that, I'm going to move on and start to discuss what is coaching the adolescent athlete from a holistic perspective. What does that actually mean? So holistic athlete development is a value-based holistic approach that integrates strength and conditioning, athletic medicine, sport nutrition, sport psychology, sports science, leadership, and personal development. Now, for the purposes of today's webinar, I'm just going to focus on the leadership and personal development piece, but in my role outside of community sport and in my position in the board, I actually do consult on the other areas as well. Now, when I say that this topic is gaining momentum, I've included a little snippet here from Princeton as they launched their holistic performance program in November of 2018. I'm noticing this in the university streams, and I've noticed this concept in Europe in various rugby or soccer academies and high performing programs as becoming more and more important for helping athletes achieve peak performance, understanding that their human skills and their life skills need to be addressed as well in a more holistic way than just through the technical and tactical aspect. Now, what is adolescence? So the athletes before you are getting a little bit of a mixed understanding that they're trying to navigate. So the Canada soccer models have the train to train, train to compete, and train to win that I've outlined and their long-term player development guidelines. But when students go through school, student athletes, so they're entering grades 7 and 8, they're 13 and 14, they transition through some leadership positions within their school. Then they go into high school, and then they're at the bottom of the food chain. At this point in grades 9 through 10, they're trying to navigate their way through school, and academics take a change, their school sports change, their social and peer groups change as well. And then lastly, in school, we have the 11th and 12th, the senior divisions, and that again, there's a lot of changes in those age groups and responsibilities and opportunities in school to explore all kinds of different things that do affect their development as soccer players when they're trying to make decisions at these specific ages. And lastly, I'd like to identify what the adolescence is defined as in childhood and child development. So there's early adolescence, and then there's early adulthood from 17 to 25. Now, I'm not going to go in this presentation into up to 25 years, but we will get up to the 19-year-old age group and discuss how in all of these ages there's always overlap. So even though there are wonderful guidelines and development models set out, each player that is before you is wildly ahead, behind, right on time for them in their pathway through these age groups. As adolescents, there's a lot of changes going on in their cognitive, emotional, social, and their physical development. Now, what is positive youth development? So it synthesizes current research on how youth grow and develop across these 4 domains, so the cognitive, social, emotional, and physical. But then we also combine that research with what young people's own perspective is on what they need to succeed and successfully transition. So a great effort has gone into asking the adolescents what they need from adults and what they need from coaches and from their peers and what they need in life to actually feel better as they transition through the stages. And youth development has actually grown and added much layers of complexity as they transition into adulthood. And it's become less clear and direct than, say, 15 or 20 years ago. There's just so many streams, and there's more factors, and there's more diverse routes that they can take to get where they want to go. So it's become increasingly complex for the typical adolescent to navigate their next steps through their pathway. Now, development is individual. So every young person is an individual with their own unique background, abilities, characteristics, life events, and context. There are major developmental events that are common across young people and likely to occur in adolescence. But this webinar is intended to provide practical, usable information about youth development that can help identify supports and strategies that players may need as they develop So if they can gain these strategies from coaches or administrators or people involved in your life, that would help them along their developmental path. I cannot stress enough how important it is to see the athlete before you as an individual. They're wildly diverse in each of these areas that you see, and there is no one way, one specific answer for each student or student athlete in front of you that's going to work for everybody. Now, quickly through the four areas we're going to discuss is the first is the cognitive development. So cognitive development is brain-based development, and it's the reasoning and their thinking, and it's changes in the brain. The brain will continue to adapt. Brain function becomes increasingly efficient and specialized. The executive function, so the decision-making, the rational thought, it slowly matures through adolescence. The processing speed, concentration, and memory also improve. And lastly, reasoning, perspective taking, and learning strategies, abilities improve. Now, how do we support cognitive development? The youth articulate that they want a reasonable level of support to help keep their lives in order. They want reminders about upcoming commitments. They want strategies, to-do lists, calendars, agendas. When deadlines or obligations are missed, they are looking for their adult allies to show some understanding. So to discuss with them, you know, how did this happen? What are some strategies we can put into place where this doesn't happen again? They need some help in this area. On one occasion, I've discussed with many students how they need to improve their grades as they are getting pressure from teachers or coaches that they're unable to play if they can't get their test scores up. And they will communicate right back to me, I don't even know how to study for a test. So one strategy would be to actually think of the situation from their perspective and what they need from us and how we can establish some strategies for them to get their needs met, such as joining study groups, having peer tutors or tutors set up, or making time to give them strategies to prepare more for these things. And the last point, when faced with significant life decisions, most youth said that they were interested in hearing and discussing the experiences from others. So they were keen to seek multiple opinions from people they trust and respect on their decision making. So we definitely want to be somebody that is an ally for them in that regard. Now, moving on to emotional development. Emotional development is experiencing emotions, self-regulation, and empathy. Adolescents are less able to regulate their desires and emotions. I think we can all say that we've had the odd encounter with an adolescent that has had some poor emotional regulation skills from time to time. And learning to manage these emotions is a key task. They develop new adaptive strategies, so positive strategies such as walking away or taking deep breaths or thinking before they're speaking, but they may also adopt some maladaptive strategies such as avoidance or drinking or other negative behaviors that are not helpful. Self-regulation is a critical success factor for adolescents. And lastly, motivation becomes increasingly internalized. Now, how do we support emotional development with these adolescents? As young people develop the skills to manage new and intense emotions, they tell us they often look for sources such as family, friends, teachers, or coaches for comfort and support. But if they're going to trust you in order to express these concerns, they want their feelings validated. So they don't want their ideas dismissed. They would like their feelings to be taken with consideration and thought and given feedback that's appropriate for them. They would like to be spoken more to like an adult, even though they're not adults yet, but they are still looking for that respect and dignity piece when they're sharing their concerns. They are also adamant that they need information and advice on the impact of their risky behaviors, so they're better prepared to make good decisions. The next thing we're going to discuss is the social development of adolescents. So socially, they are exploring identity, relationships with peers, romantic partners, their moral capacity, and their family. Adolescents develop a sense of self-identity that carries into early adulthood. While maintaining their sense of self, youth have to develop a capacity for intimate relationships with their peers, romantic partners, or with their family members independently. In order to successfully manage their relationships, young people also have to develop their strategies for addressing their moral issues. And you may see this developing on your teams as student athletes wanting to leave teams or decrease the level that they're playing. They may have boyfriends or girlfriends that they're bringing to practices or games, and they definitely need healthy strategies for navigating these complex new relationships that are forming with their peers, romantic partners, and their family. Some student athletes express concern that they don't want their parents or family members watching them practice anymore as they age through adolescence. They'd like a little more independence in that regard. So we have to do our best to listen to them as they move through these stages. Additionally, socially, they want to explore varied identities. They have issues that arise with their self-concept, self-efficacy, and esteem. Their social group identity may change and expand. They're exploring their spiritual identity. The ability to appreciate various perspectives begins to emerge in adolescence. And this also facilitates deeper peer relationships. Romantic relationships may be emerging. And as I mentioned earlier, the parent relationships may suffer. That it doesn't always suffer, but in some cases, in order for some athletes to move towards an independent piece, they feel they have to put their parents at a greater distance away from them. Now, how do we support them through their social development? They've articulated that they want freedom to discover their identity and to express their individuality is crucial, but they are conscious of being judged or rejected from others. So they advise it is important for adults to keep an open mind. They want peers and family members and community leaders and contemporary figures to be role models in their life. They're very influenced by their sense of identity, by what that they're seeing on a daily basis. So there's some definite strategies that they're telling us, and one in particular I'd like to bring up again is not to be criticized and judged and rejected. So it's important to teens to want to be validated and to feel like they belong and to feel that they're treated with dignity. And they're definitely looking for positive role models to help them sort through these stages. Now, the last stage I'm going to discuss is the physical development of the athletes that you're seeing in front of you. So that's their physical activity levels, their growth and physical development, their body image and nutrition. It also includes strength and endurance, identifying their strengths and limitations, their sleep patterns, puberty signals and the onset of many changes, and their body image. So I included a photo here of Daniel, who I've had the pleasure of working with, and he's in white and his brother is in the black, and Daniel's in 8th grade and his brother is in 7th grade in this photo. And it was a combined age in football that year, and unfortunately, I'm sure you can guess which one left the sport of football. So there are some players that get left behind for a couple years or a year just because they simply don't feel that they can compete physically with some of the other kids, and that is natural. Players need to be told that development in this area is nonlinear. It doesn't happen the same for everybody, and that they may need to be patient for some time and let their physical development happen in a way that's meant to be for their body. Now, how do we support the physical development of your student athletes? So the youth communicate that leading a healthy and active lifestyle is a high priority to them, but it is difficult. There are many obstacles that make it difficult for them. Their lives are filled with competing concerns in adolescence. They report highly that they would like convenience to be considered. So an example of this would be if you've decided that strength and conditioning is going to be an important piece of the development of your team, then perhaps they can be given choice on how that happens. Maybe it's in their neighborhood, or it happens through school, or through a phys ed class at school, a fitness class. It doesn't necessarily have to be another night out, another day they need to get a ride somewhere, another commitment on the calendar. So if there's opportunity to have something where it's individual for them and have an ability to be more convenient, they've cited that as being very important. And the last point, variety is crucial to attracting their interests. So an example would be, you can only say this is a really important game so many times when someone's been playing a sport for 15 years or 10 years. So they feel that some of the activities are overly competitive, over too long of a time, require too much of a commitment of their time and their resources. So we've had some success with keeping extra players on a team, being open to allowing players to miss the odd practice or game and rotate through healthy scratch rules as their calendars are filled with exams or field trips or other engagements that they may be interested in. This is maybe not something that every coach wants to consider, but for the coaches that have considered it in our area, it seems to be working well. And the more open you are in communication, the better that works. So there may be some players on a team that won't miss a single thing and they love it more than anything, and they'll be there early, they'll stay late, and they won't miss a game or practice all year. But then you may have a few players that raise their hand and say, you know what, I'd really like a tiny bit of flexibility. I got a lot going on. And if that would work out with the team, then that's something that we could possibly consider. Now, what they want you to know. So the youth want you to know these 5 key themes. They want you to be supportive. They want you to guide them and not dictate. They want to make their own decisions. So as they move through adolescence, it's really important that you ask them, do you want to continue to play soccer? What level would you like to play? Are you practicing enough for you? Would you like additional practices? Would you like less? These are just some examples of guiding and being open so that they have some skin in the game on their decisions. Be patient and available. Don't be discouraged if your first offer is turned down. Sometimes it takes longer for student athletes to gain trust with you, and they may want to deal with things on their own first. They may try their peers first, and then sometimes you may be their last resort, and that's somebody that they're going to speak to a little bit later. Be open. When they actually come to you to talk, it's important. So you need to listen. And listen closely. Pay attention to their body language, pay attention to their words. Often I've worked really hard in the last few years to listen to all the little things. So a student athlete may say, I really want to go to that school to play soccer, but just in case I don't like it, I've also applied to this school. So when they're telling you things like that, you know they have a built-in backup plan, and that should just make you aware of what they're thinking. The other thing I've noticed is a student athlete may say, I've only applied to that school, I'm going to that school no matter what, it's the best program and they have the best coach. And so their language is very assertive. And from listening to that, you can see that they are approaching the situation in a different way. The 4th point is be understanding. They are going to grow and learn through failures and mistakes. It's how you respond to their failure and mistake that matters. So again, if your goal is to have a positive environment with your players, then you need to address issues and mistakes and failures, and then provide opportunities to climb out of that mistake and learn from it. So discipline means to teach. And when you're choosing to address these mistakes with your athletes? Are you doing it from a punishment perspective, punitive, or are you doing it to teach them how to be a better athlete or a better team member, a better player? And the 5th point is be empathetic. Don't belittle their feelings or be patronizing. A common thing they complain to me about is, well, my coach said back in my day, we didn't do that. We would have never watched TV or sat on a screen all day instead of gone to play footy in the park. So it isn't really back in the day anymore. We didn't have screens back then. So it is a different time, and belittling some things that they do or things they choose to do as their pastimes that they tend to grow out of in their early 20s is not really going to gain any trust with that adolescent that you're working with. And moving on. So here's where I wanted to spend the second half of the presentation, focused on like, how can you apply what we just discussed? So I've narrowed it into the 12 to 14 age group. And I would like you to understand that they start to take risks and test boundaries. Now, these are very different for every single person that is before you on your team. And some like to do this much more than others, and that's natural. They definitely want to take risks. That is well known in adolescent education. And what I found to be extremely successful is providing them opportunity to take healthy risks. So perhaps they want to run a tournament or a charity fundraiser for your club. They want opportunities to lead and get out of their comfort zone and do something different. Model good communication, conflict resolutions. So clearly they're becoming more assertive and they would like to speak up a bit more. They're going to have more conflicts in their life as their skills change and how they want to deal with things. And you need to be a good example in regards to that area for them. Help them identify the consequences of their choices. So at this age, they're going to test the sleeping and the nutrition, etc. So instead of saying, I can't believe that you didn't eat well and you had a tournament today, you could approach it from the perspective of, how do you feel? Do you think that was a good decision to not fuel your body? Well, maybe next time, what would you consider doing? Provide positive role models. They've already mentioned that it's important to them to have positive role models, so you actually need to bring some in. Bring in guest speakers, bring in older players to practice as role models. Ask the older players how they have succeeded in their sport. How do they eat? How do they sleep? There's a lot of research suggesting that adolescents tend to turn their nose up at science, but if you bring in people that are positive role models that they look up to, some high-performing athletes that they want to emulate, they will do what those people do because those are tangible. Those are right in front of them. Science seems to be at arm's length to them still. Science is science and it's over there. So I would really, really encourage clubs to bring in older players to younger players' practices and local high-performing players to come and talk to the teams often. Acknowledge their stress and discuss how the stress came to be. So for example, you have a player who's late to a game. Now they're completely stressed out, they're frazzled, they're late, they've created a ruckus with the team. So instead of addressing it in front of everybody, give the player a minute or two to calm down, breathe, cope with the stress, discuss after perhaps what could be done differently to avoid or deal with your stress. So what led up to being late to this game? How do we prevent that from happening in the future? Validate their feelings. Again, they don't want to be not validated. So if they say something to you, you don't just dismiss it as, you're just a kid and that's how kids think. Yeah, that's exactly right. They're just an adolescent and that's how adolescents think. And you have to honor that and meet them where they are, not where you are. Give them opportunity to save face. So they're going to say things and they're going to do things they regret. That is inevitable. So often I've learned that I'll say to a student athlete, are you sure you meant what you said, or did you mean to say this? And they'll say, yeah, that one. Or I'll come at them and say, are you sure you meant to say that, or do you want to think about it and then kind of come back to me at the end of the game and we can talk about what maybe you're meaning to communicate to me. So always give them an out, because often they'll say something or they'll do something and they really regret it right away. And they would like you to give them a chance to learn and save face and keep their dignity intact. Really try hard to recognize when they need space. So you can see some when kids are getting worked up. You have to be a keen observer when you're with teenagers. You can see some are getting fidgety. You can see some are starting to lose their patience or in a game, when to take them off. You need to give them space when they need it so they can gain control again and come back a healthier, more stable participant. Now, I find this extremely important, is having player meetings with an agenda and a time limit. So I can't think of anything more annoying for a teenager than to sit them in front of you and start asking them, firing away questions at them, and they have no idea why you are doing it and how long it's going to take. So is it going to be 5 minutes? Am I sitting here for 25 minutes? Like they have things to do. So I found a lot of success in having an agenda. Give it to them a little bit early, a day or two before, so they have time to think about it. We're going to have player meetings on Tuesday. They'll be 5 to 7 minutes in time, and we're going to talk about these 3 or 4 things. And then when they come to their meeting, actually really listen to them. So let them articulate. You try to talk less, let them share more. You can guide the conversation, but be prepared to really try to hold back and let them communicate to you where they're at. Again, provide social and team building events. It's really important for 12 to 14-year-olds to feel like they belong. Ask them what they would like from soccer. Recognize that this is a snapshot. So some of them may say, I want to go on and be a pro soccer player. Others will say, all I want to do is play with my friends. Recognize that that is just how they feel that day. And 3 months from now, or a year from now, or 2 years from now, that could be wildly different. Help them set up short and long-term goals. So some are weekly or monthly, and other long-term goals could be 2 years from now, 3 years, 5-year plans. Realize that their self-assessment skills are developing and they may have seemingly unrealistic goals. So really common conversation I have with kids is, where do you see yourself in this sport in the future? And many say, I'm going to play pro soccer, or I'm going to be in the NFL or the NBA or the NHL. This is extremely common at this age group. And it is not our place to tell them how difficult that is. Oh, it's a 0.001%. They don't want to hear that because they don't have that rational thought yet. They don't have those self-assessment skills, and we need to honor that. Now, the last point, 2 points here, is discussing puberty and how it may start to affect their development. They just need to be aware that that's coming. Often it works negatively for some athletes. So I've noticed this over the years with girls. It sometimes hurts their development for a bit of a time. And with boys, it tends to boost their development, which is really a topic for another webinar. But the players need to be made aware that this is impending. And lastly, provide information regarding keeping their kits clean, deodorant, showering, personal hygiene. And please try not to do this individually. We do this at great length with our 13, 14-year-olds at school, because it's just not something that they're all realizing that they need to do and when they need to do it. And it's a common chat with large group. Moving on to applications for coaching 13 to 19-year-olds. So allow opportunities for leadership. So one thing that I find is very successful in working with this age group is they definitely want to lead. So allow different players, especially at 13, 14, 15, to rotate through roles as like the team leadership, or different players will lead warm-up each practice or the cool down. Different players could set up a drill or a game. Players this age want to contribute to the practice plans. They've been going to soccer for a long time. They've expressed to me, everywhere I go in life, I'm bossed around. I'm bossed around at school, I'm bossed around at soccer, and I'm bossed around at my job, and I'm bossed around at home. So any place that you can give them some autonomy or some ability to contribute to their life, They absolutely usually enjoy it. So I usually give out practice plan sheets. I let players draw up some practices that they want. I'll assign players to specific practices that they get to lead drills or games for a piece of that practice. As I mentioned earlier, it seems to have a lot of success. Now, start to establish communication channels more through the adolescent and less through the parent. So we don't want to ignore the parent. We all know that's not a wise decision, but we do want to empower the adolescent to speak for themselves. I notice this transition is great between 15 and 16 and 17. So as they're moving towards that 17-year-old stage, whereas they could be 18 and leaving high school at that point or leaving home, they need to be able to have some ability to communicate either through a team app or calendars or actual face-to-face communication with their coaches, with administration, with their parents, and with their teammates on their own. Ask them about the other areas of their life, school, family, jobs. If you don't know what's going on in their life, then how do you know the player before you, what they may need that day? So, for example, I had a player just recently explained that both his parents lost their job in the same 6 months. They haven't had new jobs. They're worried about losing their house. He's feeling extremely stressed over these issues, and by him sharing that, it changed my perception of what he's going through. And I put in some extra supports, some check-ins with them to help make sure that he had some extra support through this thing in his life that he was dealing with. Now, be patient as they experience stress at different times that you may not be aware of. So, for example, exams. They're big in January and June. And in June, there's a ton of fatigue in June. So kids are spent from being in school for 10 months. Some students have 4 exams in June and 4 large culminating activities in school. They're just spread thin. They've had it. And I call sometimes this a perfect time to kind of taper and pull back from what you're asking them to do. They still need to practice and play, obviously, as it's a really good stress relief for them. But understand that they're going through a lot at that time. Some players, it affects them greatly. Others, not so much. They'll just hum and haw along the way, and it's like a little hiccup on their week, and it's not even that big of a deal. So each student athlete experiences these stressors or these things that have to do with stress, such as an injury or a family issue, differently. Now set short and long-term goals again with the understanding that this is a snapshot. So this is something you need to revisit often. Students change their minds often. They change their pathways often. They change what they like often. So touching base with this every year that they go through between 13 and 18 is important. Allow for healthy debate. It seems odd to allow this, like you're losing power as a coach, but they want to have input into their team. So if you're playing a team on a Saturday and it happens to be a Tuesday practice, you can ask questions. What system do you think we should play against this team? What players do you think that we should keep an extra eye on? What set plays should we consider? And take notes. Even if you have not a single interest in actually using anything that they're telling you, at least they're being validated, they're being heard, they feel like they have some skin in the game, even more than just showing up and being told what to do. And it goes a long way. And you'd be surprised how much you learn from them. Teenagers know a lot more than we think. And their player assessments and their perceptions of how other teams play is ripe for the asking. I've learned so much over the year from asking them. And that's part of being humble when you're working and coaching with teams, is be humble enough to ask them. Now also understand that puberty may cause late bloomers to need extra support. So it tends to be that there are boys who, if they're late to puberty, will leave the sport. And as much as I don't want children leaving sport, they may need to take a break, go to a lower level, try something different. I always use the example of I've had athletes tear their ACLs and miss a full soccer season and go back, and they're just fantastic. So if a player has made the decision that they would like to take a year off, try something different, that's not for us to judge. That's not for you to say, oh, you're smaller, but you can handle them and that sort of thing. Again, that's laced with guilt, and that's our expectations. That's not what the athlete wants to do. And 1 year when you're playing a sport for 15 years isn't going to make a difference in the long term. And if that's something that they need to do to get through a year or two, then that's something that they need to do, and it needs to be supported. And some additional concerns for 13 to 19-year-olds is you need to discuss their post-secondary plans with an open mind. So if they're in front of you and they're 17 and 18, and they're trying to get a 90 average in school, they're trying to get into a specific program, you have to honor that. There are students who study 6 hours a night. There are students who study 20 minutes a night or 0. And you have to honor the fact that there are some kids who are really trying to play soccer because they love it, but that is not their #1 goal in moving on in that sport. Now, also, I'd encourage you to ask them continuously throughout these years, why do you play? Where would you like to play in the future? And what are some strategies to make that happen? So if the person's goal is to stay where they are in mid-level or a lower level, like a house league, they want to be active for life and play with their friends, that's awesome. If their strategy is to just continue on that path, and who's it for us to judge if we see potential in them and we know they can get a lot better if that's not something that they're wanting to consider. Respect their goals and plans and keep communication open to change. So you may say, I understand your idea for your soccer path and will support you on it if it stays the same, or if you would like to change it. Students really love that open-ended ability to come back. So when someone said to them, I thought you quit soccer, well, now you've called them a quitter, and now you've basically implied that they had no interest of ever coming back ever. So to me, it's very important you don't use language like that you use language like, I see that you've redirected your interest for a year and you can always come back to soccer when you'd like to. Be a safe place. Adolescents sometimes communicate things are not going well at school or at home, and sports is the only thing they're doing right now that doesn't cause them stress. So we have to realize that they love it. If they're there, they usually love it, and we want to keep that love of the game. And it's unfortunate that they may be having issues at school and at home. So why would we add another layer of stress onto them at their sport? So again, it's knowing your athletes, it's building a relationship with your athletes, it's taking the time to talk to them, which may need to be built into practice. It's important I coached older athletes. Most recently, I built 15 minutes into practice and 15 minutes after practice for this sort of taking your shin pads and cleats off and talking about your week or your day and just observing and listening and letting them de-stress instead of practice is over, everybody leaves in 2 seconds and you don't have any time to talk to each other. So sometimes they really need that social piece and that connection with their teammates and coaches. Now, encourage and support without judgments, their rite of passage. This comes up so much. So you have proms and field trips and other events that are really, really important to teens, even when it competes with soccer. So you must approach the situation individually through their lens. So an example would be a huge tournament, but they also have prom. You may have 2 girls in the same team who are supposed to be at the same soccer tournament, the same prom, and one girl really wants to go to the prom and the other girl's like, why would I ever miss a soccer tournament? And both of those are perfectly reasonable answers. The one girl may say, it's my only prom of my life. And you know what? She's right. If that's how she feels and that's an important rite of passage through adolescence that she would like to attend, then we have to honor that. As well as other things that come up like weddings and field trips, that social piece, that connection to school, those things that are inevitably going to come up as conflicts. We need to honor that every student looks at those through a different lens based on how perhaps their role on the team, perhaps their family pressure, perhaps their own personal competitive drive. And that has to be taken into consideration. Now, team building and team social events continue to be important. As always, they need to feel connected to their team and that it's a safe place. Not everyone has to get along perfectly, but you do need to always be treating each other with respect and dignity. Now, the 7 to 19-year-old is a little bit more challenging because they're exiting high school and the stressors that come with that. And they're kind of exiting that youth sport stream where they need to go post 18 plus and make some big decisions in this area. So you'd like to encourage a realistic understanding of their abilities while realizing some may need to find out for themselves. You are still going to have players on your teams at this age tell you they're going to play pro soccer. They're getting a D1 scholarship. You may know that that's seemingly impossible for that athlete, but you still cannot say to them. It will always reveal itself. The sport will reveal itself to them in time between 17 and 21. It usually does. So it could be their drive. It could be their opportunity. It could be injuries. It could be their need to go to school. It's really not for the adults in life to tell them, that's out of your reach, you can't do that, and you're not that good, you can't play that. I think when you break things down, that you are honest with them and that you are telling them how they have different pathways to get where they want to go, and that's okay. Don't be surprised if they don't follow your advice. They are teenagers. Continue to set the short and long-term goals and revisit how they can be accomplished. Continue to have player meetings with set time limits. Again, establish clear expectations for behavior so they know what's expected of them. If dealing with misbehavior, separate their emotion from their behavior and the person from the behavior. So you're not calling them lazy because now you're labeling them. You can say, I felt that you were not your best self in practice today. You weren't giving it your best effort. You appeared like you were behaving in a lazy manner. Continue to give them space and strategies for expressing concerns, and now provide opportunities for leadership through choice. So they don't want to make anything mandatory. They're getting older, and if they're not of that leadership nature, then it's not needed to be forced on them. Accept that their post-secondary and athletic plans are difficult to plan simultaneously. Continue to ask them about their lives outside of school as they try to communicate their concerns and navigate all of their stressors. Continue to provide social experiences, although there's a little bit of switch in less rah-rah team building and more, how will we focus on learning the differences between everybody and accepting them and realizing that the more we accept each other for our strengths, weaknesses, and uniqueness, the more we'll be successful as a team. Again, continue to remain approachable and safe. And the last one I'd like to point out is consider the barriers to participation. So money, time, academics, these things weigh heavily on them, and that is important for us to understand as well. Now, the last 3 or 4 slides, I'd like to talk about some additional considerations in the last about 5-7 minutes. I'm going to try to go a little bit quicker here. It's all about the delivery. So nobody wants to be yelled at and screamed at, especially in front of each other. So how you choose to communicate with them is very important. Hashtag no days off. I'm seeing this and hearing this all the time. This isn't an inappropriate message unless your day off means recovery day. Often kids do need a recovery day, just a sleep day, eat and sleep. And if instead of saying no days off, as in you should be always out doing something, a recovery day needs to be built in. Adult lens, not their lens. So people continue to see the sport through your adult lens and not the eyes of the child. So what are they going through in their stage? Like, what are they seeing in their environment? So also, there are specific applications in your specific community. So are you rural? Are you urban? Is there a lot of resources for you? Is there little? So that is the difficult part too, and how you access supports within your community. Parents looking like angry birds. These are words straight from their mouths. So if you're sitting on the sidelines at games and you're glaring at kids, glaring at other kids on the team, rolling eyes, throwing hands up in the air, this is not what they need. they notice, and this doesn't do anything to help kids stay in sports at all. She's just a coach that looks for the bad in me. So again, we need to find ways to find the positive. Even like the lowest few players on your team need to feel as important as the top players on your team. You need to find ways that make them feel as valuable. I've had students almost yearly ask me, can you please make us a league with no parents or coaches? No, why, I ask, and they just want to go play. They want to play games. They don't want to be nitpicked and picked apart by parents or coaches. So no, not all of you are doing this. We're well aware of that. It's hit and miss from certain parents or certain coaches, but for them to express that they would just love a league like that, I think that we need to take note. Now, this I Love to Watch You Play by John O'Sullivan from Changing the Game Project. I love that concept when your children are under 12. I really think that's important. You don't want to nitpick them. But my older athletes tend to communicate that, oh, I don't want to play football anymore. I don't want to play soccer anymore, but my parents love it so much. They love coming, they love watching me, so I can't do it. Or I want to play a lower level, but my parents love me on this team and all their friends are on this team. So as they go through adolescence, it might be wise for some parents to kind of step back and make sure you say, I love to watch you ride your bike. I love to watch you sit on the porch with your grandma. I love to watch you get your fishing license. I just love you and I love watching you do things in life, instead of just only using that concept for their soccer. And I mentioned a little earlier about using labels, so not calling kids quitters. You can say they've redirected their interests. Another thing the student athletes have articulated is, oh, I'm just playing a lower level and it doesn't really mean anything. Kids at higher levels need to be told that kids playing at lower levels or house league are just as important in the player development pathway as them. They are playing for the love of the game. We all end up in Active for Life at some point, and their communication to each other needs to be as respectful as possible instead of this hierarchy of being not humble and dismissing kids that play at lower levels. Again, back to my point of asking them, do you even want to play this season? We just sign up kids, assume they want to play here, they want to play there. We need to have an open discussion, actually ask them. They want permission to make decisions without guilt, shame, or judgment. And if they are exiting sport, you don't want it to be because of you. Now, 2 more slides left here, just hang in there. I thought this was really important to include because if you'll notice, 50% of youth athletes believe their chance at receiving a college scholarship is somewhat likely. That's 50% of adolescents. So when I say that they're not really good at self-reflecting and assessing, that's actually very true. We need to support them on this journey and be open and honest with our communication, but realize that they have to come to this understanding that only 1 to 5% of athletes ever get a Division I scholarship, and that's through all the divisions in university. That's not even Division I. That it is a very difficult task to do, but realize that they're not making that connection. 50% of kids think they're that 1%, and they will come to that conclusion on their own through 15 through 20. As long as we're patient along the way. And so some additional considerations, you'll look for the Michigan State University, their Department of Youth Sports. I'd like to point out that combining athletics and academics is a really large challenge for kids. I've also mentioned in the middle part that you need to prepare kids for moving up and down the ranks. You don't just always play at the top level. There should be some movement up and down levels. You should have years where you develop more than others. You should have some years of some setbacks. That is very common. And my last PGA Tour, my Arnold Palmer quote I included was to swing your swing. And that not some idea of a swing, not a swing you saw on TV, not that swing you wish you had. No, just swing your swing. It's prized only by you. Perfect in its imperfection. Now, the reason I mention that is because so many kids are, if you could just be like this, if you could just do that, if you could just be a little bit faster, if you could just be a little bit stronger, it's this chronic of not accepting who they are with their own strengths and weaknesses and just going through their soccer pathway the way they were meant to go through their soccer pathway. We need to give the game and their decisions and their development back to them and realize and support them on their own personal path through sport. And here's my last slide. A few little to-do things. In all these player meetings that I'm discussing, you need to keep records of these conversations and meetings. It may seem like you won't forget what they're telling you, but you likely will. Anecdotal records assist you with tracking their concerns and feedback over time. If they've asked you for something to do for them, like reach out to university coach, then you need to do it. You need to be a person of your word, as building trust with adolescents is so crucial. Realize you can only do the best you can with the knowledge you have. So no one's expecting you to meet all of their needs in every aspect of personal leadership development. Enlist support and assistance if you have the resources to do so. A big thing I like to say is you don't want to be coaching the same way 5 years from now if you've been coaching for 5 years. So every year you should be learning and adjusting and gaining some tools in your toolbox so you're not repeating the same things over and over. Understand what worked with one player may not work with another. That is just the nature of humanity and personal development and everybody having their own path through their journey in adolescence. And please view anything they're doing as a snapshot in time, realizing that they may change a lot in many aspects over the adolescent years, and let them be free to do it. So if they start off in high school extremely academic and then that kind of takes a little dip, so be it. If they start off really kind of lackadaisical in soccer and ho-hum and don't try that hard, then all of a sudden they hit 15 and they take off, then allow that to happen too. Give them opportunities to change and permission to do so with your support. And lastly, be patient and enjoy them. And that's it. Thank you, Armand.
No problem. Thank you so much, Wendy, for that. Honestly, this was very informative. As I mentioned to you yesterday, our department, between myself, Chris, Gabriella, under our supervision of Gabe, we look at player development throughout the lens of 4 to 18, with obviously a higher emphasis on the grassroots 4 to 12, as there are different departments that work on high performance. But this is something that you can apply all the way through. And I think for us, it's important to encompass this as part of our player development as well. And looking at that, and we spoke about this yesterday, and I'll start pushing towards some of those questions as we give people a chance to type them in, is looking at, some stuff might be specific to the later ages of adolescence. Like when we spoke about the 17 to 19-year-olds and their next stage of life and post-secondary, etc. But there are some stuff that in the early to mid-adolescent years that can also be applied towards the, I would say, middle to late stage of grassroots.
Sure.
And it's very, and you mentioned it right away at the very beginning, there's so much overlap in there that, and it's like we talk about, player development is from 4 to 18. And there are some components that are more specific at 4 and more specific at 18. But throughout those middle ranges, there's a lot of overlap and stuff we build into the foundation of grassroots players from, let's say, when they can start thinking a little bit more complex, obviously not to the complexity of way older, but just a little bit more complex, maybe 10, 11, those foundations can start priming them as they get to 13, 14, 15, 16, and create this interpersonal relationship that's easier to address and easier to manage versus starting something brand new with an individual when they're 13 or 14.
Absolutely, that's a good idea.
We do have some people that can ask questions right now. Okay. If anybody wants to, they can type them in there. As this was going on, I actually made a list of my own questions that I kind of wanted. Well, some of them might be more comments, but just things that really stood out to me throughout it. So I'll give people a chance to type some questions in, and maybe I'll start off with a simple one. I'll kind of build off that first comment that I just made, if that's okay.
Sure.
So just again, on touching on that overlapping, when I spoke a little bit about that, how would you kind of recommend certain foundation pieces that we can implement towards that late grassroots stage that can kind of prime individuals, not just athletes, as you mentioned, but these individuals as they get into the adolescent stream, into that new phase of their life, so that we can really manage these interpersonal relationships that we as coaches often put on the back burner, not intentionally, mind you, but just sometimes it ends up falling behind the technical and tactical components, as you mentioned.
So what I would do, or what I do is I have player meetings. So you can have team meetings and parent meetings where you can discuss the stage that they're in and what's going to be coming up. You can establish some routines that you can put in place, like you said, kind of before they're ready to be utilized, just so they have some practice at it before it becomes more important for them. So an example will be I make player checklists, and it's in regards to their school, their nutrition. It could be check off how many fruits and vegetables you're having in a day. Is it 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, those sorts of things. I have a behavior checklist that I give them. So it's how do I treat my team members? Am I positive? Do I look for the best in them? Do I point out their flaws? So they actually go through these checklists, and then it's always for self-reflection after. And there's a ranking score that I even give them to these checklists, so that they learn what behavior is expected of them. So how do I treat the officials when calls don't go my way? 1, I ignore it and realize that that's just part of the game. 2 is I make a comment to other players on my team so the official can hear. And 3, I make comments to the official about how wrong he or she got the call. So then when they add their scores up, they can see that they're actually behaving in ways that are not in line with your codes of conduct or your behavior codes or your mission statements of your teams and that sort of thing. So it's way easier to have these rules in place at the beginning of the season, so the parents know what's expected. So maybe you're watching a game and you see a player who decides to yell at another player on another team and yell at an official, and then you decide to take them off the field. The parents and players and rest of the teammates will actually know why you're doing it.
Okay, I like that, and then that's kind of now prime you for those more complicated discussions as they get there, and without kind of just putting the spotlight on a player who might just react, as you said, for whatever reason. Right. Might be taking up, they might have had a hard day at school, parents, friends, etc. So you're already getting them mindful and cognizant of, just like you mentioned, self-reflection and being aware, which I think is so vital right now.
And by taking them off the field too, you're articulating to them that it's because you need to cool down. It's not for punishment. It's to cool down, reflect. Let's think about the situation so that when you go back out on the field, that doesn't happen again.
Absolutely, and that's prime, because again, you give them that time to cool off, and then they can get back to the task at hand and really direct all their energy towards their game or their practice, whatever it might be. A question that came in, was wondering if possible, can you expand on how you gathered your information as to what adolescents want? Was this through discussion, surveys, just experience, etc.?
Yeah, so there's a government document that I'm going to send to you. It's called Stepping Stones, and there were dozens of youth organizations contacted, and over 400 adolescents responded to all the surveys. And this is probably about 12 university professors in partnership with this community initiative through the Ontario government. So I get access through player development models, through the school board, through the Ministry of Education regarding adolescence. So I have a very long comprehensive list of resources. So yeah, the Stepping Stones document is probably easiest one that they can find, and that is supportive of this. And also anecdotal evidence, although a lower form of science-based evidence, it's still a form of evidence. So 15 years, I've counseled over 400 players to move on in university sport or higher. And I can't even describe how many meetings I've had, hundreds and hundreds of meetings face-to-face with these players over the years. And that actually has a definite influence on my perspective on all of these evidence-based concepts. So there's the evidence-based, which is coming from, I guess, the academic background, and then there's the actual practical, where I've had my feet on the ground and my boots on the ground, playing soccer, coaching soccer, teaching adolescents and athletes only. I only teach athletes in the program I work in, and really listening to them, where I've come up with these sorts of strategies.
Okay, perfect. And yeah, so if you could for sure share that document with me, and I can get that up onto our website as just another resource for anybody to kind of look into as well, and to pair that up with the webinar, and so they can get that, how that matches up and goes with it. There's a couple that came in, but I'm going to tie those questions into a comment and then create that question out of it. I think from the very beginning of the webinar and through your introduction and as you started, I think it was very clear to understand that this webinar predominantly focused on the interpersonal aspects of coaching versus the actual tactical and technical understanding of it. And I think that's so key in today's world of how we manage interactions with children and adolescents, and even adult to adult. It's all about how we do things and why we do things versus just go do this because I'm the coach and I'm telling you what to do. And it's kind of a two-part question here, is how do you recommend, if possible, or see ways that we as coaches can strengthen this interpersonal relationship when we sometimes only see players twice or 3 times a week? And I know you mentioned some stuff like giving access for convenience of different strength and conditioning and these additional meetings, which are huge components to add. And that kind of takes it away from just, okay, you only see them twice or 3 times a week and it's all practice environment. So these meetings are really good. And I liked how you explained to create an agenda and maximize 5 to 7 minutes and do those a couple times if you need more. Do you have something else that I might have missed that could kind of also supplement this type of relationship building?
Well, I'll give you an example. Yeah, and absolutely, I was not focusing on any technical or tactical. I know that there's plenty of other people that can cover that. An example would be I had a player who didn't want to go to practice anymore, didn't want to go to games. It took a little bit of conversation through other people on the team to find out that his girlfriend had left him for someone else on the team. Now, these are things that they don't reveal to coaches because perhaps they don't want drama on their teams, or they don't want to tell a coach that something's bothering them, and then the coach may sit them, seeing as they're not their best. So yes, definitely you have individual meetings, but in this specific case, this player is not going to reveal it to the coach anyway. It was a different player that revealed it, where I could now understand why the player at hand was not having a good time in practice and was standoffish, and I could just read his body language and things were not going well. But it takes some work, and I know what you're saying. You only have 2 to 3 sessions a week, and that's why some players are easier able to separate their personal life from their soccer life. But how do you do that when the root of your issue is right before you? So every single situation is different. Every team is different. And like I said, the reason I got the information was from someone else on the team through one of those player meetings. You could have this role assigned to an assistant coach. So maybe the coach is too busy managing everything. So perhaps that's an assistant coach role. The player meetings are run through the assistant coach, and the assistant coach chooses what information is needed to move on to the coach or not. So, because we all know coaches are volunteers, usually overscheduled, and we don't want to drive people out of volunteering by adding layers and layers of responsibilities on them. But it just is what it is. Like it's the nature of the beast that these kids come to us with these issues, and it's the same in school. And we have to have ways to try to help them navigate through these years.
Absolutely. And I think, and even on that, like I guess it comes down to the subtle steps you take as a coach and a leader within those 2 or 3 days you see these players to create that environment that allows for that almost, I guess, honesty, safe space that we spoke about, and vulnerability for these players to come and open up to you, whether that be the player themselves or another teammate indirectly opening up for their peer. And to your point of the assistant coach, I think that's really, really vital as well in some aspects where you coach your sibling or your child as well, because children and parents, they often don't share, they always hold something back. But if there's an assistant coach or another trusted figure that your child or your sibling or whoever it is can open up to them, and their child or sibling can open up to you, it still creates that safe space and allows for that interpersonal relationship to develop, which can only strengthen the technical and tactical and on-field component as well.
Absolutely. That's what the research says.
Wow. Perfect. And then I think we'll finish it up with this last question, if that's okay with you. For the coach themselves, what are some questions or self-reflection tools or methods that we as coaches can follow to make sure that we are creating this almost environment of interpersonal relationship developing to really promote that physical support, emotional support, and social support of our athletes? Just like you spoke about a little checklist for the players to how to regulate it, is there something that you can recommend for us coaches to kind of take apart?
Yeah, actually, I have an idea. I've noticed that in certain sports, coaches are much more willing to do this than others, just based on the environment. So by soccer, the nature of it being on a field, this is not an easy task to do. I've noticed in basketball when they have offices, or at football, they have offices. Most of my meetings with students are in classrooms and offices. Well, at a soccer pitch, it's not really ideal to sit around and have a player meeting sitting on a bench and there's balls flying by and there might be a rainstorm rolling in, and it's really not the most conducive spot to host the meetines. So it is a little bit problematic, and I have realized in time it has to be scheduled. I've had sports teams over the years take this advice. They do usually 3 meetings a year, beginning of the year, mid-season, and exit planning. And they schedule them all, and they all happen regardless. If you don't schedule them, they're not going to happen. There's always something that comes up. And they could be in part of a team building day. So an event of some sort, you're at a tournament, and within the tournament setting, teams are in hotel, and then you're in the lobby, and you could rotate kids through. But again, if they're not planned and they're not scheduled, I find that it just doesn't work as well.
No, that's very true. And yeah, that is the nature of the beast of our sport, where you're constantly traveling from one field to another. But no, and then I guess, yeah, like a little checklist of kind of using this, what you want to address. Maybe you're going to focus on social or emotional or physical, what you notice with that player or your interactions with your players, and how you want to kind of address that in your discussion. And then you'll take that into there, and you really have a scheduled and organized flow of a 5 to 7 minute meeting that doesn't become overwhelming or strays off too much and then has to be redirected. But it's like straight to the point. Here's our discussion. Here's my checklist to go with. If there's more to it, then we'll let you debrief this, reflect on it, and then we'll go address another one at a later date as well.
Absolutely. Awkwardly staring at teenagers and asking them open-ended questions and expecting them to think on the spot and give you a deep, self-reflective answer doesn't always go well.
No, absolutely. But okay, well, I'd just like to say on behalf of my team in Ontario Soccer, thank you for joining us from this morning to this afternoon with a very informative webinar on a different stage of player development specifically, but also helping us understand how we can incorporate it across the range regardless, because there's such a huge overlap of players and their differences. So thank you for joining us with this. If there are more questions that come in, feel free to email us, anybody from the player development team, myself, my colleagues, Chris, Gabriella, or Gabe. And I have direct contact with Wendy. We'll be sure to continually flow questions and work towards getting some more information out for us.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was an honor. And if anyone does have questions or email or would like my email, you can share it with them for sure. And I'd be more than willing to assist in any way.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Wendy. And I will be in touch with you offline.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.